you. So good morning to everybody. I'm Daniela Prugger. I'm the General Secretary of Presse Club Concordia, and we are here in the heart of Vienna. And I welcome you and our speakers from all over the world, actually. This talk is part of the series European Contexts, which is a project by Presse Club Concordia and Forum for Journalism and Media Vienna, which is a training institution for journalists, and the partner is the Erste Foundation here in Vienna. And most of you, I guess, know already our seminars that are authored and moderated by Mirjana Tomic, and they always give us deep insights and context from about urgent political topics. So this is it from my side. A big thank you to our speakers. This is the first and most important thing to say from my side. And I hand over to Mirjana, who will introduce you and give an introduction to the topic. Thank you so much, Mirjana.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Good morning. As Daniela said, my name is Mirjana Tomic. I am the author and moderator of European Context seminars and talks. Thank you so much for joining our panel, Media and Society in Ukraine after 3 years of war, current and future challenges. 2 weeks before the 3rd anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and 21 days since US President Donald Trump took oath of office, events seem to accelerate. My initial idea was to understand how Ukrainian media and society have changed in the past 3 years and what are current and future challenges, meaning future in a sense like the war will end and what will, are there any ideas or projects how the society will look like? However, the decisions of the US President Trump have affected, let's say, the topics, because just to mention a few decisions he has made that do have an impact on Ukraine. One is the freezing of the US aid funds and practical dismantling of the US aid agencies. Then we have learned about the alleged conversations between President Trump and President Putin about ending the war. I understand President Zelensky of Ukraine will be in Washington next week. Then we have the US demand that Ukraine trades its rare earths in exchange for military support. And this morning, I read a report on Kyiv Independent that part of the deal would be also that Ukraine has to buy American products. Then we have the apparent volte-face of the President Zelensky, who now accepts to negotiate with President Putin. All these developments have direct impact on the society, both those on the front and those who are in the cities that are not on the front line, and as well as those who are in diaspora. President Zelensky now talks about peace, both under pressure and from public opinion. And where are we now, especially after the U.S. freezing of the U.S. aid funds, which were one of the most important sources of funding of independent media in Ukraine. Not only in Ukraine, but in Ukraine it is very important because these independent media also were the most important sources of information on corruption and government misdeeds, so to say. So for this really important topics, we have 4 speakers, 3 Ukrainian and an Italian. Vadym Miskyi is a program director of the NGO Detector Media, a leading Ukrainian think tank in the field of media freedom and countering disinformation. He's a member of supervisory board of the National Public Broadcaster Company of Ukraine, and he also became a member of the Expert Council on the Development of State Strategic Communication Systems under the Ministry of Culture and Strategic Communications of Ukraine. Anna Babinets is the director and editor of Sledstvo, an investigative agency based in Kyiv, and a regional editor of Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. Anna specializes in discovering high-scale corruption, money laundering schemes and crimes. She's a member of Panama Papers team, and her agency is also involved in following or uncovering and reporting on the war crimes, on Russian war crimes. I should add that both organizations, the above-mentioned organizations, depend heavily on the USAID funds. Our third speaker is Kristina Berdynskykh. She's a freelance journalist. She used to work for the Ukrainian NV magazine and Radio NV, and she now contributes to different international media, among others, Il Folio in Italy and Libération in France. Last but not least, Daniela Prugger is an award-winning Italian journalist, but she publishes mostly in German. She is a freelance correspondent from Ukraine. She has been living there since 2020, and she writes for different Austrian, German, and Italian media. Vadym, let us start with you. We had, when we were preparing this event, we talked that you would give us an overview of media landscape in Ukraine, who is who, etc. Now it is media landscape plus the US funds, how the freezing of USAID is affecting the media in Ukraine. The screen is yours. And before, just one thing, the format is simple. I shall first talk to our speakers, and then, of course, we shall open the panel for live questions from the audience. Vadym, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mirjana, and thank you for invitation to this event to discuss all the challenges. Do you see that since our last discussions 1.5 weeks ago, new challenges arose, like this limiting of stop of support for State Department and all freezing of all the US funds. So we live in constantly uncertain environment, new challenges arising day by day. It never stopped during last 3 years. It's actually the main characteristic of our media landscape, how it works last 3 years during a big war. So what changed? We discussed with you which main changes we can see during last 3 years. I think there are a few of them. First of all, it's digital shift. Ukrainian media have significantly increased their digital presence, and TV was the major media. Since Ukraine got independent, it decreased year by year, and I can show you few slides how it just to visualize it, how it looks like in terms of media consumption now. It's data from USAID Internews, now freezed, unfortunately, a yearly report. You see the rise of social networks and rise and decline of news websites, decline of television, decline of radio, and almost and print media almost finished their operation in Ukraine. There are few, but very small percentage of audience read them. And this trend is ongoing. So you see that social networks are growing year by year. It's important also to notice that among social networks and messenger, number one in Ukraine during the full-scale invasion became Telegram, the platform which has strong connections with Russia and which is not addicted at all to countering any disinformation. So it's not even, there is no button to report disinformation there. You can report, for example, child pornography, you can report human trafficking or something else, but not disinformation like it used to be used to be on Facebook and previously on Twitter before Musk acquired it. But now we see that all the other big platforms in the world are changing their attitude to disinformation, and probably they will become not that safe environment as it was last, for example, 5 to 10 years. Yeah, here you see slides. The yellow circles, it's a consumption of 2024. The blue circles, it's consumption of 2023. So you see the main is Telegram, then YouTube, Facebook, Viber, but dominant is Telegram, and it's unfortunately have no policies regarding limiting disinformation there. Also, it's important to notice that oligarchs who used to own big media platforms in Ukraine last 3 years, when the full-scale invasion in Ukraine started, they lost a lot of their influence on media. Now, how it happened? The state Zelensky office organized so-called national TV marathon, a special format on television, which unites governmental owned and private owned biggest TV networks, which produce news and information content. They call this format TV marathon United News. And you see there is now there are 6 producers now, those who contribute to this marathon, and they simultaneously broadcasted TV channel Rada, it's parliamentary state-owned channel, 1+1 owned by Kolomoisky oligarch, My Ukraina, it's well, it used to be owned by Rinat Akhmetov, and now they say that journalists own it, but we understand that some interests of big oligarchs are there, especially they might be interests of the office of the president. ICTV, owned by Pinchuk, and Inter, one of the 4 posts of pro-Russian views previously in Ukraine. They united now, and it helps to government to control somehow influence of their programming policy, not to be undermining the state institutions, but also this marathon criticized for lack of political balance in the news reporting. For example, some factions of political factions represented in the parliament are not represented at all at this United News TV marathon, but we understand that this influence is very limited. If we come back to our first slide, you see television, 30% of audience, they competing on this market, and 30% of Ukrainians watch TV, and out of this 30%, 8% watch TV marathon. It's their audience share. If we consider this 30 as 100, so 8% of them are viewers of national TV marathon. So I'd rather say that this intervention, which is legitimate for Ukrainian power during the situation of war, you understand that in Europe, the freedom of expression is not unlimited freedom, like in US, for example. They have First Amendment to Constitution, which says that Congress cannot approve any legal documents which limit freedom of expression. In Europe, it can be limited according to Human Rights Declaration, and if, for example, war reasons is one of the reasons legitimate to limit the freedom of expression. And this limitation is influencing on very small percentage of audience. So it's we cannot say that government took full control over media landscape, even with such big measures. There are plenty of other media operating in Ukraine, online media, which are probably more influential than TV. There are independent public broadcaster also, which has their own broadcasts separately from this United TV Marathon since last May. Before that, it was joint broadcast. The public broadcaster was a part of this TV Marathon. Even TV viewers can get information beyond this government-influenced broadcast.
What is the main what is the main difference between the information you get on this government controlled media and the rest? And you know, in all wars and conflict, there is so much misinformation, even when Russia is not involved. How does it? What are the trustworthy media for most of the population, or there isn't such thing because people get whatever they can wherever they can?
Well, the main difference is the tone of voice, how they cover activities of the government, I think. So more complimentary from those who contribute to TV Marathon, and more criticizing from those who are independent and not involved in this activity. Also, it can be different if we talk about how they reflect what happened on the front line. For example, more tensions that we will win on the TV Marathon, and more independent view and different opinions on online media.
You mean pro-government will always say that they are winning, the others will also criticize the situation on the ground?
Well, not exactly always, but they say it more than online media. So more, you know, like grown up view on the situation is among independent media, of course, and this pro-governmental one is less criticizing. Always government did it okay. Nobody can say a word against, and it's just like how it works. If we talking about trust, you see 37%, I added this information from USAID Internews last report, 2024, 37% of viewers of Marathon trust it. So it's actually quite a low percentages, because I'll show you the slide with the public broadcasting, and here is the number of last opinion poll. 77% of news consumers of public broadcasting trusted news. It's one of the highest marks received by Ukrainian media from the audience. So you see this huge difference. So even viewers see that something is not very good with this TV Marathon, but the main idea of those in power is to continue supporting, financially supporting this TV Marathon, paying for also those TV channels owned by oligarchs who participating and contributing to this TV Marathon, to continue its operation until the war ends. And a few more things I'd like to show you is a slide with news deserts in Ukraine. You see the regions here, which was studied by our colleagues from Media Development Foundations, are those located in the territories which used to be occupied by Russia, like northern Ukraine, or now occupied or near the front line. Districts, administrative districts in Ukraine marked green if there are at least 2 independent media sources, marked yellow if there is at least 1 independent media source, and marked red if there is no independent media source. So that's how the situation looks. Of course, this map will change dramatically if we will make a new wave of this study after season of USAID and State Department support, because mainly independent media was supported, and mainly local independent media was supported by international donors, and America was the biggest supporter for local media. Now there is, I believe, there is no possibility to earn such a lot of money for different media, local media in Ukraine. So advertisement market, in terms of revenues of local media, advertisement is up to 10% of their budgets. So it's not much, and that means that no green zones will remain. Who will remain on local level after freezing this USAID support and maybe stopping of the support? Yes, because we don't know, the situation still develops. It's probably public broadcaster. It has deeply rooted network of correspondents in each oblast.
Excuse me, who finances the public broadcaster?
90% it's state money, Ukrainian state.
But what is then the difference between the public broadcaster and TV Marathon?
The difference is the governance model. So Suspilne, public broadcaster of Ukraine, is newly emerged public broadcaster, one of the youngest in Europe. Probably Kosovo started their public broadcaster like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and before that Ukrainian one was the youngest since 2017. It was established on the basis of huge amount of state-owned TV and radio channels, 30 different TV and radio channels, central and regional ones, and it received a new governance model with an independent supervisory board. Majority is represented by civil society, and minority is represented by our minority are those representatives of parliamentary factions. So, but you understand that in parliament, we have now single party majority. Zelensky's party have a majority in the parliament, but only one representative in the supervisory board of the public broadcasting. And each faction, even the smallest, have one representative, but they all of them are minority in the supervisory board, because majority are representatives from civil society. I elected from organizations which work with youth and children rights, journalistic organizations, sport organizations, local self-governance, and so on. So it reflects society very well, and actually public broadcaster in Ukraine is recognized, widely recognized, and impartial media by Europeans, by Americans, by local population, and
well, I understand that you're part of the board. I just
it just need to be explained why it's different, because yes, because it's have governance model. Marathon has not governance model. It just directs subsidies for the producing channels from the state budget.
Before you continue, and there is about 1 minute left, I just want to understand one thing. When you say that the civil society is present as part of the governance model of the public broadcaster that will remain as the only one probably in certain parts of Ukraine, this civil society that you mentioned, does it also depend on the US funds? So all of a sudden their influence could diminish?
Yes, partially yes. Not necessarily all of them, but partially yes, because US for a long term was the biggest, one of the biggest donors in Ukraine. Of course, European Commission and Europe is also a big donor, and some organizations rely more on grants from EU. But Ukraine, it's also needed to be explained that Ukraine has no grant support for NGOs. or for media. Only a few receives from inherited from the Soviet time different schemes, these small amounts of funding. For example, National Union of Journalists of Ukraine have very small dotation since Soviet times for their operation. The same is with some local media, for example, those who were founded by local administrations. Now we already undergone this reform. They are private media in regions, but still they have some subsidies from local authorities and so on. But that amount of money is very small comparing to all the support Ukrainian media and civil society at all received from USAID and receiving now from.
So just to conclude, and then we shall open to questions, just
Sure.
Your particular organization and the civil society, do they have to fire people, or they're in a mode like, let's not pay you for 3 months or for 1 month and let's see what happens? What is the situation right now? What are the main challenges right at this moment?
Yeah, talking about Detector Media, it's NGO which I work for. Yes, the impact was big. We sent to unpaid leave around 1/2 of our personnel. And for those who remained, the salary was decreased. Well, thanks God, we have not only US funds, but it was a substantial part of all the funding. So yes, it impacted seriously, but we hope to survive and finding now different alternative sources. But yes, for us as a big organization, it might be easier than for many those in regions, local media, local NGOs. For them, it might be much harder.
Thank you very much. And Anna, Babinets, you have founded an organization that deals with investigative journalism, corruption. You have been dealing with corruption for 10 years or longer. So you have seen how different corruption schemes have changed and who are the people that are targeted. And your organization also, I understand, was heavily hit by the freezing of the funds. I was looking at your website yesterday, and I must say that I was very impressed by the type of information you publish. For example, that one of the people who was supposed to combat corruption was discovered as corrupt. I'm just wondering, could you just give us a short overview in the 10 years, who were your main targets 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and now in this, in your investigation? That's one thing. Another thing, how are you affected, and who is your main target now? I understand you also specialize in the corruption in the army. Go ahead, Anna. And thank you so much for being with us.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting. Thank you, Vadym, for this good introduction of landscape of Ukrainian media, because we are working in our, small rooms and don't know the big picture. Yeah, first of all, our organization's Sydsvenska, which exists for almost 13 years. We established when we had pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych, and investigative journalism that time looked like underground, community who just tried to do something, and it had no success. We were not successful. Like 100 people read our stories about corruption. Now it's a million people who view our stories and read our stories. Yeah, so when we started, we mostly were focusing on corruption, high-level corruption, of course. For the time we exist, we published stories, as you mentioned, Panama Papers. It was a story about offshore of that time President Petro Poroshenko. Then we published story about offshore companies of Zelensky, who is current president now. So we published a lot of international stories about some offshores, some financial frauds. But when the big war started 3 years ago, we a little bit changed our focus, and now half of our activities, it's war crime reporting, it's frontline reporting. We have reporter who doing frontline reporting. It's one of the most expensive stuff we are doing, and because of this new financial situation, our organization was affected like pretty much, because about 80% of our budget now it was money from US government, and now we are looking for other funding from European Union. We asked our audience to donate, and they donate us. War crime reporting, it's very important part of our work, because we collect facts, we collect proofs of war crimes committed by Russian soldiers, by Russian officers here in Ukraine. And sometimes Ukrainian prosecutors and some international structures ask us to share our proofs, to put them to add them to criminal cases. And it's very important for us to do this work during these 3 years, because of course so many crimes were committed here in Ukraine, and prosecutors, official investigators, not always able to work with all of them. And we as journalists who live and act during the war, we feel this responsibility to do this and not focus only on corruption. But of course, corruption during the war still exists. For first year of full-scale invasion, we mostly were focusing on the war crimes, but then other journalists, our colleagues from different media started to publish small stories in the beginning, small stories about corruption in army, about corruption during the war. And we, Sydsvenska, as well, started doing this. It was 2 reasons why we didn't do it in first months. First, because many of official databases, official registers were closed, and we were not able to check official information. But we are not, like Russian media who can publish stuff like from 1 or 2 sources. We usually need to use real proofs, not only sources, and we can't do investigations based on sources. So without proofs like official registers, we were not able to do high quality investigation. That quality we always we respect, and what we do during our existing. And another reason that many sources we had before the war, they didn't want to talk about some wrongdoing during the war, because first months, first half of year, and even longer, many people in Ukraine thought that it will finish soon. So let's talk after the end. And then when we figure out that the end will move far and far away, if we will not talk frankly about what's going on here. So last 2 years, we published a lot of stories about corruption as well. And now, as I see, of course, corruption changed, because there are a lot of money in military area, in a lot of money going to army, a lot of money going to some security service and other structure. And now
Excuse me, in terms of corruption in the army, in which area there is the greatest amount of corruption that you're dealing with?
In all structures connected to the war. I can't say like some, only Ministry of Defense, but there are a lot of scandals around Ministry of Defense, because there is a put for army, there is the process of drafting people. There are a lot of questions to that. This is arms trading, of course. And security service, as I mentioned, it's very important. Security service of Ukraine, very important. It's intelligence in Ukraine, and very important.
You mean there is also corruption there?
Yes, the last year we published at least 3 stories about top officials of security service who bought some expensive real estate in Kyiv, around Kyiv, and it didn't connect with their official income. And we publish stories about that. And when we're talking about corruption during the war, what we see that people from structures around army, around military sectors, there are a lot of young people, and sometimes it's people who really heroes in some understanding. They're doing really good things during the war, but on other hand, they taking money for their own reasons, buying real estate in Ukraine, outside of Ukraine, and we see that that's not connect to their official salaries. It's like different amounts, what they bought and what they really earn. We see corruption. We also work a lot with judges, and we publish many stories about very big salaries of them, about bad work they're doing, about the process of selection judges, and we still see the process is not transparent, and we see many judges who think about their work not only like work, and other it's like more regular direction what we had before the war.
You had a title today, it's Google translated. Anti-corruption court judge Valeria Horina defrauded the state of almost 2 million hryvnias in judicial fees. My question is, well, there are two, and one is, isn't, with all this pressure and all these publications, is there enough consciousness that one should stop being corrupt, or people still feel that, they can just go on as ever? And I also was told by you and your other colleagues that a lot of these institutions and media that investigate corruption were financed by external sources. So it means that if there is no more money, there will be less information about corruption. Do I get it correctly?
Yes, absolutely correctly, because it's very hard to do investigations during the war. It's very hard to grow journalists, because for my experience, for being good investigative journalist, you should work 2-3 years every day for being really experienced and good journalist. And now, if when we lost funding from United States, and when we are looking for another funding, I can't just tell my people that we stop working from Monday, see you in months, when I'll find money, because it's not easy to collect again people with this exclusive type of knowledge, exclusive type of tools, exclusive type of feeling the world. And I think it's we will lose good independent media, not only investigative media, because of that, which means that Russian propaganda comes, Russian money comes to Ukrainian market, business, politician money comes, they will want to buy small media, big media, and it means that people in Ukraine and around the world will not have sources with independent information, will not understand how the money, for example, for the war, during the war, how Ukrainian government manages money, and the independent media are very important for that.
But
about the first question,
go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
But the first question about corruption, when it will be enough, it's not so simple question, because now, of course, when we have so many media, so many NGOs which reports about corruption, we have this feeling like everything is so bad, like it's never been. But I'm not sure that it's like that, because for many years we didn't have independent media and NGOs, and it was doing just in the dark. Now we have this lighter, and we can see what's really going on, and we just need to accept this and do something with that. But as I know that many Ukrainian officials, they really care about their name, about their names, about their mentions in journalistic stories, in investigations, because they know that because Google remembers everything. And they really care, especially young politicians, young officials who want to build careers. They really care not to be part of investigations and journalistic story. It's important for them.
Thank you so much. The time is running very fast. There is so much information. Now I shall come to Kristina. I have asked Kristina to talk about the society, but I think I will also we will also have to change a little bit, because the history and the events are accelerating so fast. I will ask you, Kristina, first of all, what is the major change towards mobilization in the war in Ukrainian society? If you can just give us the view from the front, the view in Ukraine, and also this gap that I think is increasing between the Ukrainians who have left the country, diaspora, and Ukraine. Just give us an overview, and then I will have a few more questions. Like how will the society, or how do you think the society or public opinion will react to the conversation between Trump and Putin? Yes, Zelensky has changed his discourse. How will the society? A lot of people have family members who have died on the front. How will the society react, or public opinion, if Ukraine has to give its natural wealth? Although I'm not quite sure which part of this wealth is under Russian occupation, which is really in Ukrainian hands, that I'm not sure. There are so many changes, and how do you think the society will react, and is Ukraine ready for this post-war society? What will it look like when people return from the front? Go ahead. A lot of questions for 10 minutes.
Yeah, at first, I want briefly to describe the situation inside Ukrainian society and what happened, the main changes, what happened during last years. Yeah, and after that, I will try to answer or another all your questions. Yeah, very briefly, what happened during this time? 2022 was a year of shock in Ukraine, but also when came a belief and quick victory, because Ukraine liberated some part of territories which were occupied at the beginning. Yeah, 2023 was a year of high expectations, but also of disappointments, because counteroffensive did not succeed. And 2024 was a year of defense and of survival. I can describe like that. And we don't know what 2025 will look like, but it was like main changes. A very important thing that I want to mention, it's the most significant factors influencing on our country is demographics, because before the start of full-scale invasion, according to the UN data, population of Ukraine was nearly 37 million of people. And currently, the population of the Ukrainian territories controlled by Ukraine is 30 millions, and 7 or 8 million people remain abroad. And we understand that the longer the war continues, the less chances that these people will back to the country. Yeah, because children, they attend schools and universities, women, they find jobs, yes, and people start think not about the short perspective, yes, not for 1 and 2 years, but for longer perspective. If they already had an education abroad, yes, they want to finish that and to think about their future. And also, I can give you also another example that in the first year of the full-scale invasion, it was a boom of marriages in Ukraine. But now we see another tendency that divorces are increasing because it's also very hard for families to have these relationships in distance. Yes, when your family is abroad and a husband is in Ukraine, but during 3 years, it's very hard to have this type of family. And now this is a time that people make their decisions, what they will do. For example, a lot of women back to Ukraine. They spent 6 months abroad or even 1 year, but when they decided to back with kids to Ukraine because they want to have normal family, yes, and not to live between two countries. But someone decided not to back because they are still afraid of war, yes, and there are a lot of challenges, and it's connected, first of all, with safety, yes, and this is now it's a time for decisions, and it's connected also to your personal, even to your personal life. Now I want to talk a little bit about lines of conflicts inside Ukrainian society. Yes, what divide us. But I want to start from the good news because even after 3 years of full-scale invasion, Ukrainian society is still united. And we see that in polls that 53% of people believe that we are still united, and only 33% think that divisions are deepen. And it's this indication is higher than it was before the full-scale invasion. But of course, there are a lot of problems and misunderstanding inside society, and I will describe maybe main of that. At first, I want to mention our main groups inside and outside Ukrainian society. First of all, those who are fighting on the front, yes? And other people is those who never left their hometown. For example, they were in Kyiv when the full-scale invasion started, and they still in Kyiv, like me, yeah? Another part of people, it's internally displaced people. This is people who moved from, for example, from east and south of Ukraine to west or to the central of Ukraine. They have another problems in their life. And another group of people who was evacuated abroad. And between all these groups, there are some misunderstanding between each other. And because very often people feel this like justice. Yes, I can give you a few examples. Yeah, the most simple, why someone is fighting on the front and another not fighting. Yes. Some people will want to go to the army, but another one try to avoid this, yes, and just to not to join the army. They don't want to fight, yes. Business has their own arguments because not everyone should be on the front, because someone should also to continue to work in factories, yes, and just to maintain our Ukrainian economy, yes. And it's also business try to explain that we need people in our factories, yes, because you should do something with mobilization because we can produce our products. And for this reason, government created a system of economical reservation, but very often it's also unfair, and sometimes we should tell truth, corrupt, yes, and people also feel that. a gap between soldiers, their families, and civilians. For example, one wife or mother of soldiers very often think, why my husband on the front last 3 years and without any hope on demobilization, and our guys, they just continue to attend bars and gyms. Yes, you know, this type of question. Also, we have a lot of, we should also remember that we have a lot of prisoners of wars in Russia, captivity, yeah? And it's huge suffering for families and people. Every week we have demonstrations in Kyiv of these families because they want to remind also civilians that please don't forget about what happened in Russian captivities, because we know that Ukrainian soldiers are tortured, beaten in Russian captivities, and sometimes died, yes, after that. And when you, for example, live in very peaceful city, you can forget about this war reality.
I think, by the way, we forget how big Ukraine is as well.
Yes, yeah, I will tell about that also, because sometimes these dividing lines can be even about security. For example, I have my hometown is Kherson. It's south of Ukraine, and it's heavy shelled every single day. And the new tendency last month by drones and just Russian bombs by drones, civilian cars, and it's very dangerous just to go from one street to another to visit your family inside one city. And when I talk with my relatives from Kherson, for example, I talked with Daniela 1 month ago. I had rocket incomes in Kyiv just 2 minutes from my place, yes, and it was like awful picture. But when I talked with my relatives from Kherson, and they answered me, sorry, but it's our everyday reality. And you in Kyiv, you are so like not very strong people. It's our everyday reality. And this is example also because I think the main factor which influence on all these factors, it's like different experience during the war. If you have relatives in the army or not, if you lost your relatives, I don't know, if someone died, your friends, yes, from shelling on the front, everywhere, yeah. In which city do you live during the war? It's also very important, yes, yeah. And I want
you
also
have about 2 minutes.
Yeah, it's very important, yes, to mention also about occupation, because it's also a huge problem. We have in Ukraine territories which were occupied during 1 month. It's Kyiv region, which were occupied less than 1 year. It's Kherson and Kharkiv region, which occupied already 3 years, Mariupol, for example, and the territories which occupied 11 years, it's Crimea and Donetsk and Luhansk. And it's all different situations, depends on how long the occupation happened and consequences after that, yes? And for example, I did a report from Izum in Kharkiv region, which were occupied 7 months, and some people stayed in the city during the occupation, but someone escaped. And after this city was liberated, people back. And between people who stayed in the city and people who backed, it was a big misunderstanding between each other, because people who stayed, they told they didn't understand our experience and what we went through. And people who backed told that some of you collaborated with Russians, and it was also true, yes, and how could you, yes, and now they live in the same city, and they should try to find a common language between each other. And it was just 7 months of occupation, yes, and what we can tell about 3 years or 11 years. And last things about political life, yes, I think it's also very interesting to audience. Just two things about, I know that a huge discussion about elections, for example, in international media. 60% of people against elections during the war, during this type of war that we have now, very active war, yeah? And it doesn't mean that people support government or Zelensky team. It just understand it that if we will now organize election, it will be a huge factor of destabilization inside country, and Russia absolutely will use it against us. And also that it's impossible to provide election in democracy way, because, for example, soldiers in trenches, they can't vote in this time, yeah? Yeah, this is one big point. And last things about that, just 19% of people support freezing of war on current line, because
19%.
19, yes, because people think that Russia will back soon after that, again with war. They don't believe that it can solve the problem. But 50% of people, they support some compromises with international mediators. It shows like that people in Ukraine, they really want peace, but they won't have also some security guarantees, yes? Because if we just freeze the war, Russia just will analyze the situation, what they did wrong, and will back soon in a few months or in 1 year with the bigger war, yes? And they can achieve their goals after that. That's why, like, I think main things what I wanted to say, and I'm ready to answer to your question about all another things.
I'll just, we have so little time left, and I would only, I want to make one comment. There is a conversation going in a chat, which I'm not very good at multitasking, but the thing is, this conversation, I would like also our audience in the video that we'll be seeing on YouTube to follow. So I will, after I ask Daniela to speak about international coverage, I would like Vadym to give a very short summary of what he wrote in the chat, if it is okay. Daniela, you are an international observer who has been on the ground. Can you just give us an overview? I had the impression, as someone reading American media and some European media, that the coverage at the beginning was very supportive, and probably certain international, I'm speaking of the mainstream media, didn't even mention if they saw certain things, let's say corruption, a little bit like Anna was describing that happened how Ukrainian media. But then there was a sort of a tipping point where everything seemed to change, and now it is allowed. So just your comment on that. And please tell us, as a former international correspondent, I do know how important it is to be on the ground. How many media are actually on the ground, to what extent international media in major European languages and in English, to what extent they depend on so-called, in my time, we used to call them parachuters, people who come, write something and go away and then return or not return. And yes, could you just give us this overview? Who is covering, how it is covered, what are the topics? Is there interest, or the interesting? Because I also know from the past, and it is the case now, if you're not in the headlines, you are not on political agenda. And that applies to internal news and international news. Please go ahead.
I will also try to answer all those questions. So maybe let's start with the amount of coverage. It is much less, of course, than it was in 2022, but I think the good news is that it's still much more than it used to be before the full-scale invasion, because, as you mentioned, there are quite a few media that have committed to the reporting on Ukraine. Media that have opened offices on the ground or that have permanent correspondents. So I think that is a very good development. In the first year of the war, Kristina mentioned this, there was obviously this huge shock for everyone, I think, in Ukraine, but also abroad when it came to the start of the full-scale invasion. So that was the dominating topic, but also the resilience of the population, the millions of refugees. So back then it was very easy to sell stories, to publish stories, because stories were basically requested from all over the country, from Uzhhorod to Donbass. It didn't really matter what the topic was, because there was such a hunger for information on what was happening on the ground. And also there was a need, I think, for also fighting certain pro-Russian narratives that dominated the media space before the full-scale invasion. I think there were a lot of misunderstandings before that. And so basically that changed. There was a lot of stories on, of course, the horrendous war crimes after the liberation of Russian-occupied territories, also in Kyiv Oblast, for example. I think that was the news back then, and that was also what the media focused on, because we reported on that, and that was the dominating topic back then. And it was astonishing, the amount of journalists that came to Ukraine. There were hundreds of media teams all over the country. For the first anniversary, for example, I remember in the center of Kyiv, there were TV crews all over the city, even wearing flak jackets. There were a lot of freelance journalists, photographers that came, also because I think Ukraine is still very accessible in terms of traveling. Of course, it's very difficult to come here. It takes a lot of time, but you can still take a train or a bus, for example, from Vienna, and you can come to Kyiv. So I think that also contributed to the amount of people that came to cover the war. I think 3 years after the start of the full-scale invasion, the situation is different. A lot of the freelancers, photographers, writers, videographers are not coming back to Ukraine because there isn't a lot of assignments, and I think the media companies are not willing to spend that much money anymore on stories and on like sending people here. That was different in the first year of the war because the money wasn't really a question. Now we do see a tendency of, can you do that story from Kyiv, for example? Is it necessary to go somewhere? So I think that also changed a lot. And I think that is not a very good development because you also mentioned that it's important to be on the ground, and it's difficult to assess the situation from Kyiv when we speak about the Donbass, for example, or the south of Ukraine, which is like hundreds of kilometers away, right? So it is important to go out there. On the other hand, for example, last night there were again drone attacks on Kyiv, on Sumy and other oblasts. I think 3 years after the start of the full-scale invasion, that doesn't make headlines anymore. So that is also a very big difference. We see that now these are news that are covered in the news tickers that a lot of media have, where basically they quote what Vitaly Klitschko is saying, the mayor of Kyiv. In the first year of the full-scale invasion, I would have received a phone call from a radio station to give a live assessment on the situation. Now that is not happening anymore. If there is not a major attack, like we spoke about that with Kristina before in Kyiv, for example, in the end of December, that happened really close to her apartment. So that really changed. And I also spoke to several colleagues here on the ground because I wanted to know what their impressions are. So everyone agrees that there is less coverage, of course, but then it also depends really on the country, on the countries where the media is based, because it depends on, for example, there are countries that are part of NATO, then there are countries like Austria and Switzerland. So I think that also changes the kind of focus and interest on the coverage. There's some countries that are really interested in following the weapon deliveries. Do they arrive to Ukraine? How are they used? Can we see them in action and so on? Then there's also a difference in covering the situation on the ground from the TV perspective, the text perspective. So, you know, there is a lot of factors. I think that there are still correspondents that also committed to stay here, also freelance correspondents. So I think that is important also because there are countries in the European Union that are bordering with Ukraine, right? So when we speak about the Polish media situation, they are very interested in following everything here because it also concerns them very much. Then we have a lot of refugees that are based in EU countries. So, you know, there's like stories that we can connect to the situation in Ukraine with the home market of the media that we work for. So, yeah, I think that there is a vast interest in the general situation now, I would say, but it kind of changed in a way that now we hear that there's the stories about, will there be a peace deal or ceasefire? What is the impact of the Trump administration? We saw that right from the beginning, right? But those are also stories that are now often covered from Washington, for example, from abroad, because it's very diplomatic, it's very vague, and then we are asked what is the reaction of the people on the ground. So that also changed a lot. And then if we look at the broader picture, of course, the interest decreased with the events on October 7th, 2023, with the war in Gaza. A lot of our colleagues left Ukraine to cover the war and the events in that region. Then, I mean, after that, the interest came slightly back, but mainly from the perspective that Kristina also mentioned, because there was a big expectation when it comes to another counteroffensive of Ukraine, and then a big disappointment followed by a discussion of how will the mobilization be handled and so on. So that was something I'm really clearly remembering, because in 2023 itself, there was also another big event, the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam, that was still dominating the news, but then it really changed.
I have to interrupt you because the time is running out. I just have one question, could you please tell me, I have understood from Kristina and you that Ukrainian colleagues and Ukrainian, I guess, readers of foreign media were not so happy with how foreign and international media have covered Ukraine. Can you just say it in one sentence or two, why?
Who was not happy with the coverage? Sorry.
That the Ukrainians have not been very happy with how the international media has been covering the situation in Ukraine.
Before the full-scale invasion, you mean?
No, I mean during the war and now.
Can you is there a concrete example that you mean, or like in general, or?
Well, Kristina and I spoke about it. Maybe Kristina, you can say it.
Yeah, you know, of course, when you live in Ukraine, you want to see the picture by your own eyes in foreign media, from your perspective, because you feel this so deeply. And I try to explain to Ukrainian colleagues and to Ukrainian readers that it's very good that we have still a huge attention to Ukraine in foreign media. And if even we see it's not even very critical articles about Ukraine, but something I can tell you, I can give you examples. It's some opinions written by experts from Washington, DC, who never attended Ukraine at all, doesn't feel society, doesn't feel the situation on the ground, and they write the analytic report or opinion about what happened in Ukraine, and you just read and think how possible it is, yeah, and it's just not true. But also but we have so many journalists on the ground still, and we have a lot of articles in Ukraine. And I think I just can confirm that you told earlier that when you are not in the news, yes, you are not in the agenda. And it's very important, even if Ukrainians don't like some articles, yes, and it's especially about opinions, yes, it's so important that we have this coverage.
Thank you so much. Vadym, I understand you have been discussing in the chat. There are a lot of questions to you. Could you please just summarize what you were replying to our audience, because we shall be posting this on YouTube and we will not be seeing this chat. Could you just summarize the discussion?
Yes, thank you so much. So it was an interesting question from Ginko Kobayashi, which social media is used, American ones or Telegram. Telegram is the most popular. 3 out of 4 people in Ukraine say that they receive news from Telegram. And 40% of those who receive news from Telegram don't care which exact Telegram channel bring this news, either an anonymous channel or some media brand stands behind, or just some, I don't know, whoever, Russian, pro-Russian, or some proxy delivers this news. That's a big problem of Telegram, that you never know who stands behind. Of course, in some cases, you know, if, for example, I don't know, some news brand, Ukrainian media, trustworthy, they also are present there. But Telegram is also a platform for sharing different anonymous type of information, some insights, some which is of course full of fakes and manipulations. Another question was regarding whom we considered as independent media. Are they fully dependent from foreign sources of funding like US? Saying independent, I mean, and we usually in Ukraine mean independent from oligarchs and independent from ruling party, who typically use media as a tool in a competition in struggle for power. But it's also worth to mention that usually US and EU financial support has not been accompanied by any requirement to endorse some politicians. So that's why we consider it independent from political influence. And another question was from Artem Lis, that on social media there is a discussion if media cannot rely on their own earnings at open market, they do not deserve to live. And how widespread is this view? Well, this perspective exists. In public discourse, some argue that media should sustain themselves solely through the open market. But in reality, independent journalism worldwide relied on grants, on public funding. Why? Because high quality news and information content is often difficult to monetize. That's why across Europe, there are public broadcasters in each country, which rely on public funds, either donations or paying for license or some state support. That's also an example of why good quality journalism need some support from public funds, not only from the market selling advertisement. And he says that, yes, he understands, Artem says, this concept, but do Ukrainian society understand it? And it's really good question, because while some people understand the necessity of support for independent media, a significant part of the society does not realize this need or sees it even unfair. Many people are focused on their own economic problems, and they just don't care how quality journalism is funded. Unfortunately, this is the reality. And the last question was that we are speaking a lot about the risk of limiting of this USAID support, but are there any possibilities emerging from it? And frankly speaking, I don't see any very good opportunities, but actually there is one. The closure of USAID of these programs can create a chance for Europe to step in. And I don't believe actually that Ukrainian local media can rely on domestic funding, even on public funds as donations, because the people in Ukraine now prefer to donate for military needs, and advertisers also prioritize national outlets because they have bigger coverage. So it's a bad situation, bad news for local media. And without international support, local market will just collapse. And this vacuum created by this collapse will be filled with Russian narratives, Russian messages, anonymous Telegram channels, and everything like that, proxy media, where Russia stands behind. So that's why it is very important to support local media to find another way of, for this time of war, international, I believe, support. Because if it will be a situation when it planned in 5 years, the amount of money from US will decrease and you have to establish another sources of funding, it can be planned. But taking into account that it stopped immediately, in the evening of Friday, they send a letter that you cannot spend any cent for anything. It is impossible to survive without another international donor, I believe.
Well, I hope a lot of donors will be hearing because what you have just said, because we shall definitely distribute this video. And I think that among also the audience, there are some there are journalists and journalist organizations from different parts of Europe. I have like 2 or 3 more minutes if I extend. Are there any questions? Well, now we have all the questions seem to you, Vadym. The existence of independent media of the government oligarchs might be a precondition for EU membership. Well, I guess this is an opinion, but then there was also the demand from the US that Ukraine buys American goods. So I don't know if that is a precondition. Well, since we have come to the end, just one sentence from each one of you. What is your personal view of what happens if President Putin and President Trump reach a deal that does not that is not well accepted by the Ukrainian society? Let's start with you, Kristina. What will happen?
You know, even if Trump and Putin will meet and will decide, I don't know, to cut military aid to Ukraine, yes, American military aid, yes, to press on Ukraine to stop fighting, continue fighting on the field, yes. I still don't see how it's possible to realize this kind of peace, because what Putin wants and what he will say or maybe he already said in his phone conversation with Trump, he included some of Ukrainian territories in his constitution. And for example, not of all of these territories occupied by Russia. For Kherson region and Zaporizhia region partly occupied by Russia, but Kherson, the main town in this region, is not occupied, and Zaporizhia is not occupied. It's impossible to imagine that Ukraine will agree to give these big cities just like a present to Putin for occupation. Yes, and even discussion on on which border, on which line we can froze a conflict. It's very, very complicated. Yes, that's why I don't believe that Ukraine can accept this type of deal between them, and it means that Ukraine will continue to fight even without support from US. Unfortunately, it will be huge losses of people. Yes, but anyway, but we will see how Trump will press on Putin. Yes, sanctions, I don't know which kind of arguments he will use in conversation with him. Now I see a negotiation process. Yes, but everyone will talk with Trump. Putin will talk with Trump, Zelensky will talk with Trump. But as my point of view, it's not big chance that they will meet all together. Yes, and it will be like a final decision.
Thank you very much. Anna, what is your thought?
I will be short because I think that Trump, as we see for the 3 weeks, he is absolutely unpredictable. So we can't predict anything. So there are a lot of rumors around this plan. Let's look at the plan and then decide, because I don't think that we should spend time for imagining what's in Trump's head. It's not possible, and maybe it's even good that we can't imagine what's in his head.
Thank you very much, Daniela.
Yeah, I totally agree with Anna. I think unless we don't see the details and know more about what a plan looks like and whether we are talking about a ceasefire or something more permanent and a future perspective for Ukraine with security guarantees, which of course is like the main topic for Ukrainians, for like a substantial future and peace for the country. I also don't believe that it's time for predictions.
Thank you. And Vadym, just one sentence.
Yeah, generally the same. I expect that we only will understand in nearest days and weeks what exact Trump would like to propose. But actually, at this moment of time, it is extremely important that EU and Ukraine be involved in these peace talks, because if there will be some peace deal without opinion of Ukraine and the EU, it just might not be accepted by Ukrainians. Also, Ukrainian people can just lose trust to the West, and it will not be resolving of the war which will secure something for the West. It just finding another alliances, another guarantees, and so on. So it's hard to predict at this point of time, because everything is changing every day. But I think that it is extremely important to keep EU and Ukraine involved.
Thank you so much for your message. I thank all of you. We shall continue this conversation. You have opened a lot of topics that have been discussed. We shall discuss them in the future, because we know one has to be in the headlines. And whatever the outcome, I really do hope you find funds for media, for independent media. Whatever happens, media is one of the important pillars of democracy, and quality media is absolutely essential. So I do hope that potential donors hear this discussion. Thank you very much.